My name is Jenny, and at 57 years old, I never imagined I would change my will to exclude my only son. After 35 years of marriage to Frank, my world shattered with his passing. But what broke my heart beyond repair was the phone call where my son chose his wife's birthday celebration over his own father's funeral. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could reach. When your child abandons you at your darkest hour, something fundamental changes inside you. Before I share my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If this resonates with you at all, please hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how a mother's heart can break and rebuild in ways you never thought possible. Frank and I met at a community picnic in the summer of 1988. He had the kindest blue eyes and a laugh that made everyone around him smile. We married within a year, both of us knowing we'd found our person. Our early years together were full of dreams, adventures, and the kind of deep love that makes you feel invincible. We bought our first home, a modest 3-bedroom, in a friendly neighborhood where we planned to raise our family. Michael came along in 1992, our beautiful baby boy. Frank cried when he held him for the first time, whispering promises about teaching him to fish and throw a baseball. And he kept every single one. As Michael grew, their bond strengthened. Frank never missed a little league game or school performance. He taught Michael everything from changing a tire to treating people with respect. I watched their relationship bloom, my heart full with the family we'd created. Our home was always filled with laughter. Sunday dinners became our tradition, with Frank grilling in the backyard while Michael and I prepared sides in the kitchen. We'd share stories about our week, discuss books we were reading, and plan our next camping trip. Those evenings remain some of my most treasured memories, all three of us connected by love and shared experiences. Michael excelled in school and went on to attend the state university where he studied business. Frank and I couldn't have been prouder when he graduated with honors. He landed a good job at a marketing firm in the city about an hour away from our home, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to build his independent life. Frank would often say, "We raised him right, Jenny. He's going to be just fine." Things changed when Michael met Vanessa at a company event. She was beautiful and ambitious, working in the same industry but for a competing firm. Their relationship moved quickly, and within 8 months, Michael brought her home to meet us. I still remember that first dinner. She was polite but reserved, asking few questions about our family. When Michael shared childhood stories, she seemed disinterested, checking her phone repeatedly. I caught Frank's eye across the table, seeing the slight furrow in his brow that matched my own concerns. Over the next year, we saw Michael less and less. Sunday dinners dwindled from weekly to monthly, then to special occasions only. When they did visit, Vanessa would steer conversations toward their social circle, their career advancements, or their material acquisitions. Frank would try to engage her, asking thoughtful questions about her family or interests, but her answers remained surface level. Michael seemed oblivious to the growing distance, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge it. They married in an elaborate ceremony that Vanessa planned down to the minute. The focus was clearly on her family traditions, with ours relegated to the background. Frank gave a heartfelt toast that brought tears to many eyes, speaking of unconditional love and the joy of welcoming Vanessa to our family. She thanked him with a quick hug before rushing off to speak with her college friends. After the wedding, our relationship with Michael became increasingly strained. Holidays became negotiation points rather than joyful gatherings. We'd get Michael for Christmas morning, but had to leave by early afternoon for Vanessa's family celebration. Thanksgiving was spent entirely with her relatives. Frank never complained, saying, "That's how it goes when kids get married, Jenny. We need to respect their choices." I tried to build a relationship with Vanessa, inviting her for lunch or shopping, but she always had a reason to decline. When I brought it up with Michael during one of our rare phone conversations, he sighed and said, "Mom, she's just busy. Don't take it personally." But it was impossible not to, especially when I'd see photos on social media of her shopping with her mother or having lunch with her sisters. When Frank turned 60, I planned a surprise party with all our friends and family. I called Michael months in advance to ensure they would attend. The day of the celebration, just 2 hours before guests were to arrive, Michael called to say they couldn't make it. Vanessa had gotten tickets to a concert she'd been wanting to see. I watched Frank's face fall when I told him, though he quickly covered his disappointment with a smile, saying, "It's okay, they're young. We'll see them next time." But these early disappointments were nothing compared to what was coming. Nothing could have prepared me for how drastically our lives would change, or how the true nature of my son's priorities would reveal itself in our darkest hour. It was a routine checkup that changed everything. Frank had been feeling tired losing weight without trying. Probably just getting old, he'd joke, but I insisted he see the doctor. I'll never forget the doctor's face when he came back with the test results, his practiced composure slipping just enough to reveal the gravity of the news before he spoke. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. Already spread to his liver. 8 months to a year at best. The drive home passed in a blur. Frank stared out the window, unnaturally quiet. When we pulled into our driveway, he turned to me with tears in his eyes. "I'm not ready to leave you, Jenny," he whispered, and I felt my heart splinter. We called Michael that evening, putting the phone on speaker. "Dad has cancer, honey," I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay strong. "It's advanced. The doctors say—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "What? No, that can't be right," Michael said, his shock evident even through the phone. "Have you gotten a second opinion? There must be treatment options." Frank explained the prognosis, his voice steady in a way I couldn't comprehend. Michael promised to drive over the next day. He did come arriving with a stack of printouts about experimental treatments and clinical trials. Frank listened patiently, then gently explained that he'd decided against aggressive measures that would only diminish the quality of his remaining time. "I want to live what I have left, son, not spend it sick from chemo with no guarantee," Michael argued, almost angry in his insistence. "You can't just give up. What about Mom? What about me?" "I'm not giving up," Frank replied calmly. "I'm choosing how I want to spend the time I have left. With your mother. With you if you'll be here." Michael visited again 2 weeks later, this time with Vanessa. She seemed uncomfortable in our home now filled with medical equipment and prescription bottles. She stayed for less than an hour, mentioning a work commitment. Michael left with her promising to come back the following weekend. He didn't. The weeks blurred into months. Frank's condition deteriorated faster than predicted. I became his full-time caregiver, learning to administer medications, manage his pain, help him with the most basic functions. Our bedroom transformed into a makeshift hospital room. Sleep became a luxury. I rarely afforded myself catching moments while Frank napped or when a kind neighbor would sit with him. Michael called occasionally but visited rarely. Each time his stays grew shorter, his excuses more elaborate. Vanessa never accompanied him after that initial visit. When I asked about her, he'd mumble something about her being busy with work or having social obligations. Frank never complained, but I saw the sadness in his eyes when he'd ask, "Any word from Michael today?" And I'd have to shake my head. 6 months after the diagnosis, I arranged a family dinner. Frank was having a good day. His pain managed well enough for him to sit at the table. I prepared his favorite meal, hoping to create another precious memory. Michael arrived alone, explaining that Vanessa had a migraine. The dinner started well, with Frank telling stories from his youth that had us laughing. But when the conversation turned to practical matters about Frank's wishes for his funeral, Michael grew visibly uncomfortable. "Do we have to talk about this now?" he asked, pushing his food around his plate. "Yes, we do," I said firmly. "Your father wants to make sure his wishes are clear. I just think it's morbid sitting here discussing funeral arrangements while Dad's still here." Frank reached across the table, placing his thin hand over Michael's. "Son, this is part of life too. I need to know you and your mother will be okay with carrying out my wishes." Michael pulled his hand away, checking his phone. "Vanessa's not feeling well. I should get back." He left shortly after without really engaging in the conversation Frank had wanted to have. As Frank's condition worsened, our world shrank to the confines of our home. Hospice nurses began visiting regularly, their compassion a lifeline I clung to. Friends dropped off meals, sent cards, called to check in. Frank's colleagues from his teaching days organized a schedule to visit, giving me brief respites to shower or run essential errands. Through it all, Michael remained distant, his calls becoming perfunctory check-ins rather than meaningful connections. The night before Frank died, he had a moment of clarity after days of being mostly unresponsive. He opened his eyes as I sat beside him, holding his hand as I had every night. "Jenny," he whispered, his voice so faint I had to lean close. "You are the love of my life. Every day with you has been a gift." I kissed his forehead, my tears falling onto his cheeks. "You are my heart, Frank." "Is Michael coming tomorrow?" he asked, hope flickering in his eyes. I couldn't bear to tell him that our son hadn't returned my last 3 calls. "He sends his love," I said instead, hating the lie but unwilling to add to his pain. Frank nodded slowly, his eyes drifting closed. Tell him I'm proud of him. Always have been. Those were the last coherent words he spoke to me. By morning, his breathing had changed, becoming shallow and irregular. I knew the end was near, and I called the hospice nurse who arrived quickly and confirmed what I already knew. I sat with him holding his hand, telling him it was okay to let go, that I would be all right. At 9:17 a.m., Frank took his last breath, leaving our world for whatever comes next. The hospice nurse helped me through the immediate aftermath, her gentle efficiency a blessing as I moved through those first terrible hours in a fog of grief. She called the funeral home we'd arranged, helped me contact our pastor, and sat with me until my friend Susan arrived. But there was one call I needed to make myself. With shaking hands, I dialed Michael's number. It went to voicemail. I tried again, and again it went unanswered. On the third try, he picked up. "Mom, what's up? I'm kind of in the middle of something." The casual tone, the impatience in his voice felt like a physical blow. I took a deep breath. "Michael, your father passed away this morning." There was silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "What? But I thought he had more time." "The cancer progressed faster than expected." I explained, my voice surprisingly steady. "He went peacefully, but I I need you to come home now. There are arrangements to make." Another pause, longer this time. "Today's really not good, Mom. It's Vanessa's birthday. We have plans with her family reservations at that new restaurant downtown. I can come tomorrow." The words didn't register at first. I thought I must have misheard. "Michael, your father just died. I need you here." "I understand that, Mom, but today is really important to Vanessa. She's been looking forward to this dinner for months. Her parents are coming in from out of town." My grief crystallized into something sharp and cold. "More important than your father's death, more important than helping your mother plan his funeral." "Don't put it like that," he said, his tone defensive. "Of course it's not more important, but it's just complicated. Vanessa would be really upset if I canceled. Her birthday is a big deal to her." "And your father's death is a big deal to me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've just lost my husband of 35 years, Michael. Your father. And you're telling me you can't be here because of a birthday dinner. Mom, please try to understand. I can be there first thing tomorrow morning. We can make all the arrangements then." "Your father's last coherent words were about you," I said. "He wanted me to tell you he was proud of you. Always has been." Michael was quiet for a moment. "I love Dad too, Mom. But Vanessa would never forgive me if I ruined her birthday. You know how she gets." In that moment, something inside me broke completely. A line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. "I see," I said, my voice now eerily calm. "I'll handle the arrangements myself. Enjoy the dinner." I ended the call and sat motionless, Susan's concerned face swimming in my vision as tears finally came. Not just tears of grief for Frank, but for the son I thought I knew. The rest of that day passed in a blur of necessary tasks. The funeral home director arrived, his practiced sympathy comforting in its professionalism. We discussed options, dates, costs. I chose a simple but dignified service, knowing Frank would have hated anything ostentatious. The pastor came by to offer condolences and discuss the service. Friends began arriving with food hugs, offers of help. Through it all, I kept expecting my phone to ring, for Michael to call back and say he'd reconsidered, that he was on his way. It never happened. That night, alone in our bed for the first time in decades, I couldn't sleep. The house felt cavernous without Frank's presence. I found myself talking to him in the darkness, asking what I'd done wrong with our son. How had we raised someone who could make such a choice? Frank had always seen the best in Michael, making excuses for his gradually increasing self-centeredness. "He's young," Frank would say. "He'll figure it out eventually." But this wasn't youthful self-absorption. This was a grown man, 32 years old, choosing his wife's birthday celebration over his father's funeral arrangements, over his mother's immediate grief. The next morning, as promised, Michael arrived. He brought flowers and an expression of practiced sorrow that didn't reach his eyes. No Vanessa, of course. "I'm here now, Mom," he said, as if that made everything okay. "What needs to be done?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. "Everything's been handled," I said. The funeral is day after tomorrow at 11. Frank's brother will give the eulogy. His colleagues from the university will serve as pallbearers. Michael frowned. Shouldn't I be a pallbearer? I'm his son. The audacity nearly took my breath away. Were you his son yesterday when I needed you? When I had to pick out his casket alone? When I had to decide whether he should be buried in his blue suit or the gray one he loved? That's not fair, Michael protested. I told you I had a commitment I couldn't break. A birthday dinner, I said flatly. For a woman who couldn't be bothered to visit her dying father-in-law more than once in 8 months. Vanessa finds illness difficult to deal with. She was trying to remember Dad as he was not. He trailed off, perhaps finally hearing how hollow his excuses sounded. I turned away suddenly too tired for this conversation. The funeral is at 11. Be there or don't. At this point, I'm not sure it matters. Michael left soon after, promising to return the next day to help with anything needed. I didn't bother telling him there was nothing left to do. The neighbors, Frank's colleagues, our friends from church, they had all stepped up. They had brought food, made phone calls, arranged flowers, done all the things a son should have done. That night, as I sorted through photos for the memorial display, I came across one of Frank holding newborn Michael in the hospital. The love on Frank's face was palpable, his expression one of wonder and absolute devotion. I thought about Frank's unwavering love for our son, how he never gave up hope that Michael would outgrow his selfishness. And I thought about Michael's response to his father's death. In that moment, surrounded by tangible memories of a life well lived, I made a decision. Frank might have forgiven Michael's absence, might have continued to make excuses for him. But Frank was gone, and I was done with excuses. The morning of Frank's funeral dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day he had loved. I dressed carefully in the navy blue dress he had always said brought out my eyes, my hands shaking as I fastened the pearl necklace he had given me on our 30th anniversary. For a moment, I almost expected to hear his voice telling me I looked beautiful, as he had every day of our marriage. Susan arrived early to drive me to the church, knowing I was in no condition to navigate traffic. "You're not alone today," she reminded me, squeezing my hand. Her simple kindness nearly broke the composure I had struggled to maintain. The church filled quickly with people whose lives Frank had touched. His students past and present, his colleagues, our neighbors, friends from every chapter of our life together. The outpouring of love would have embarrassed him, but it wrapped around me like a warm blanket on this coldest of days. I kept glancing toward the door, watching for Michael. 10 minutes before the service was to begin, he slipped in alone again. He took a seat in the front row, reserved for family, nodding solemnly to those who acknowledged him. No Vanessa again. I wasn't surprised, just numb to this additional slight. The service was everything Frank would have wanted. Simple, meaningful, with music he had loved and readings that captured his spirit. His brother Thomas spoke eloquently about Frank's character, his kindness, his subtle humor. Several of his former students shared how he had changed their lives with his mentorship and belief in their potential. When it came time for the family tribute, I had asked Frank's closest friend Robert to speak, unable to trust my own voice not to fail me. As Robert shared stories that had the congregation alternating between laughter and tears, I felt Michael shift uncomfortably beside me. This role should have been his, we both knew it, but he had forfeited the right. Throughout the service, I felt the conspicuous empty space where Michael's wife should have been. Others noticed, too. I intercepted questioning glances, sympathetic looks. Most people were too polite to ask directly, but a few did during the reception afterward. "Is Vanessa feeling unwell?" Frank's cousin Margaret asked, her tone gentle but her eyes shrewd. Before I could formulate a response, Michael interjected. "She had a prior commitment she couldn't break. She sends her deepest condolences." Margaret's eyebrow raised slightly, but she nodded and moved on. I watched Michael field similar questions throughout the reception, his explanations growing increasingly elaborate. A work emergency, a family obligation, never the truth that his wife simply didn't care enough to attend her father-in-law's funeral. Several people commented on what a wonderful man Frank had been, how devoted he was to his family, how proud he was of his son. Each well-meaning comment felt like a knife twist. Yes, Frank had been devoted to his family. Yes, he had been immensely proud of Michael. And how had that devotion, that pride, been repaid? After the last guest departed, Michael helped me gather the memorial displays and flowers to take home. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken recriminations. "You did a nice job with the service, Mom." he finally said as we drove back to the house. Dad would have approved. I looked out the window watching the familiar streets pass by. Yes, he would have. Your father never asked for much, just that the people he loved be there for him. The implication hung in the air between us. Back at the house, Michael made noises about staying to help me sort through things, but his constant checking of his phone betrayed his impatience to leave. You can go, I said finally. I'm sure Vanessa is waiting. He had the grace to look embarrassed. It's not that, Mom. I took some time off work for this, but there's a big project deadline coming up. Of course, I said. Work is important. As he gathered his things to leave, he paused awkwardly by the door. I'll call you tomorrow, okay, and I'll come by this weekend to help go through Dad's things. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After he left, I sat in Frank's chair, inhaling the lingering scent of his aftershave on the fabric. The house was so quiet now, emptied of both Frank's presence and the day's activities. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully feel not just the grief of losing Frank, but the bitter disappointment in my son. My phone rang around 8 that evening. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but answered on the third ring. Mom, just checking to make sure you're okay. As okay as can be expected, I replied. It's been a difficult day. Yeah, he agreed. Listen, I know things have been strained between us. I want you to know I love Dad. I'm really going to miss him. His words should have comforted me, but they rang hollow after his actions. Actions speak louder than words, Michael. Remember when your father taught you that, Mom, that's not fair? I was there today. Yes, you were there today, after everything was arranged and decided, after I spent the night alone after my husband died, after I had to explain to everyone why my only son couldn't be bothered to help plan his father's funeral. I told you why I couldn't come immediately, he said, defensive again. Vanessa's birthday was important. More important than your father, than me. The questions hung between us. After a long pause, he sighed. I have responsibilities to my wife too, Mom. It's complicated. I closed my eyes, suddenly bone-weary. Good night, Michael. I need to rest now. I hung up before he could respond, my decision crystallizing with each passing moment. Tomorrow I would begin to take control of what remained of my life, and that meant making some significant changes. In the weeks following Frank's funeral, I moved through life in a fog of grief and administrative necessities. There were thank you cards to write, Frank's personal effects to sort through, his financial affairs to settle. The mundane tasks of death that no one prepares you for. Michael called periodically but didn't visit as promised. Each conversation followed the same pattern: superficial inquiries about my well-being, vague promises to come by, soon transparent excuses when those promises weren't kept. I stopped expecting anything different. 1 month after the funeral, Michael and Vanessa finally visited. They arrived in their luxury SUV, Vanessa immaculately dressed as always, looking around our modest home with barely concealed disinterest. We can't stay long, she announced after perfunctory condolences. We have dinner reservations at 7 at. I served coffee and the pie Frank had always loved watching as Vanessa picked at it without eating, while Michael devoured his slice with the appetite of someone unburdened by true grief. So, Mom, he said, setting down his fork, I've been thinking about practical matters. Have you considered selling the house? It's a lot for you to maintain on your own. The question caught me off guard. This is my home, Michael. Our home. Your father and I built our life here. I understand that, but financially it might make sense to downsize. Property values in this neighborhood have increased significantly. You could get a nice condo, maybe closer to us. He exchanged a glance with Vanessa, who nodded encouragingly. I studied my son's face, recognizing the calculation behind his concern. I'm financially secure, thank you. Frank and I planned carefully for this possibility. Speaking of planning, Vanessa interjected her first real contribution to the conversation. Did Frank leave everything in order? Will you need Michael's help managing the estate? The question was so transparent in its true purpose that I almost laughed. Frank was meticulously organized, as you know. Everything is in order. That's good, Michael said quickly. But if you need any help with investments or decisions about the house, I'm here for you. Have you two considered having children? I asked, changing the subject abruptly. Frank always hoped to be a grandfather. Vanessa's expression tightened. We're focused on our careers right now. Children would complicate things. Yes, children do complicate things. I agreed, meeting her eyes directly. They require sacrifice, putting someone else's needs before your own. Not everyone is suited for it. An uncomfortable silence fell. Michael cleared his throat. Anyway, Mom, we should get together more regularly. Maybe Sunday dinners again, like we used to do. The suggestion was so at odds with their behavior over the past years that I couldn't hide my surprise. That would be quite a change from your usual schedule. Things are different now, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. With Dad gone, we want to make sure you're not alone too much. I nodded, understanding perfectly what had prompted this sudden concern. With Frank gone, I was now the sole guardian of whatever assets they believed we had accumulated. My son's priorities were becoming increasingly clear. After they left, promising to call about dinner the following Sunday, I sat in the growing darkness of our living room. Frank would have been hurt, but not surprised by Michael's behavior. He had seen the changes in our son over the years, but maintained hope that maturity would eventually bring wisdom and compassion. I didn't have the luxury of that hope anymore. The next morning, I called James Atherton, the attorney who had handled our wills and estate planning for years. His secretary scheduled an appointment for the following day. James had been Frank's friend since college, and his genuine grief at Frank's passing was evident when I entered his office. After expressing his condolences again, he shifted to professional mode. "What can I help you with today, Jenny?" he asked, glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed our file. "I want to change my will," I said simply. His eyebrows rose slightly, but his voice remained neutral. "I see. May I ask what changes you're considering?" I took a deep breath. "I want to remove Michael as my primary beneficiary." Now James looked truly surprised. "That's a significant change. May I ask why?" So I told him. About Michael's gradual withdrawal from our lives after marrying Vanessa, about his absence during Frank's illness, about the phone call on the day Frank died, about his sudden interest in my financial affairs. James listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. When I finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I understand your feelings, Jenny. Truly I do. But disinheriting your only child is a serious step. Have you discussed your disappointment with Michael directly? Would it make a difference?" I asked. "Actions reveal character, James. Michael has shown me who he is. Now I need to decide what consequences should follow." James nodded slowly. "What did you have in mind instead?" "Frank loved teaching. I want to establish a scholarship in his name at the university where he taught, and I'd like to leave portions to the Cancer Research Center that treated him so compassionately and to the hospice program that helped us in his final days." "That's certainly doable," James agreed. "What about your personal belongings?" "The house. I considered this. I'd like the house to go to Frank's niece, Amy. She and her husband are struggling to buy their first home, and they were wonderful to Frank during his illness, visiting regularly despite living 2 hours away. And personal items. Family heirlooms. I'll make a detailed list," I promised. Some things should still go to Michael, items that were important to his relationship with Frank, but the bulk will be distributed among family members and friends who actually showed up when it mattered. James made notes, then looked up at me seriously. "Jenny, I have to ask, are you making this decision out of anger? Because grief can sometimes—" "It's not anger, James," I interrupted gently. "It's clarity. Frank spent his life making excuses for Michael's behavior, hoping he would change. I don't have that luxury anymore. This isn't about punishing Michael. It's about honoring Frank's legacy by supporting the people and causes that truly meant something to him." James studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. "I'll draft the new will for your review, but I suggest you take a few weeks to think about it before signing. Major decisions during grief can sometimes be regretted later." "I'll consider that," I agreed, though my mind was already made up. True to his word, James sent the draft will 2 weeks later. I read it carefully, made a few minor adjustments, and scheduled another appointment. Before signing, I did take time to reflect on my decision. Was I being too harsh? Was I, as James suggested, acting out of grief and anger rather than clear-headed consideration? But every time my phone rang with another superficial check-in from Michael, every time he made and broke another promise to visit, my resolve strengthened. When I finally signed the new will, I felt not anger, but a strange sense of peace. Frank would have understood, I thought. He always valued authenticity above pretense. James advised me not to tell Michael about the changes immediately. There's no legal requirement to do so, he explained, and it might just create unnecessary conflict when you're still grieving. I agreed, deciding to let the matter rest for now. But I did ask James to prepare a letter to be delivered to Michael in the event of my death, explaining my decision in terms that were honest but not cruel. I wanted him to understand that choices have consequences, even if that understanding came too late to change anything. As I left James's office that day, will signed and safely filed, I felt as though I had taken the first real step in my new life without Frank, a life where I would no longer make excuses for those who didn't deserve them. A life where I would honor the memory of the man I loved by valuing what he had valued: loyalty, compassion, and showing up when it mattered most. With my legal affairs settled, I began the slow process of rebuilding my life in Frank's absence. The initial fog of grief gradually lifted, allowing me to find small joys again. I joined a widow support group at the community center, finding solace in the company of others who truly understood the unique pain of losing a spouse. These women became my lifeline, offering practical advice, shoulder to cry on, and eventually much-needed laughter. I also reconnected with old friends who had fallen by the wayside during Frank's illness when caregiving had consumed all my energy. Susan remained my closest confidant, the one person who knew the full extent of my disappointment in Michael and my decision to change my will. She never judged, only listened, and offered her unwavering support. "You know," she said one day, as we walked in the park Frank had loved, "Frank would be so proud of how you're handling everything." I smiled at the thought. I'm not sure he'd approve of the will change. He always had such faith that Michael would eventually grow up. "Maybe," Susan acknowledged. "But Frank also believed in consequences. Remember how strict he was about Michael's curfew in high school, how he made him work to pay for that fender bender instead of just writing a check?" She was right. Frank had been a loving father, but never an indulgent one. He believed in teaching Michael responsibility, a lesson our son had apparently forgotten. As months passed, Michael's calls became even less frequent. The promised Sunday dinners never materialized beyond a single awkward evening where Vanessa spent most of the time on her phone. I didn't push for more, having accepted the reality of our relationship. 6 months after Frank's death, I decided to redecorate our bedroom. It was a significant step, acknowledging that the room was now mine alone. As I sorted through Frank's remaining clothes, deciding what to donate, the doorbell rang. To my surprise, Michael stood on the porch looking unusually serious. "Mom," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "Can we talk?" I invited him in, offering coffee, which he declined. He glanced around the living room, noting the changes I had made there, too. Some of Frank's collections had been put away, replaced by artwork I'd always loved, but that Frank had merely tolerated. "The house looks different," he commented. "I'm different," I replied simply. "Life goes on, even after great loss." He nodded, still standing awkwardly, until I gestured to the sofa. "What did you want to talk about, Michael?" He sat fidgeting with his wedding ring. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately, about how things were at the end." I waited, saying nothing. "I know I wasn't around much during his illness," he continued, "and I know you were disappointed that I couldn't come immediately when he passed." "Couldn't or wouldn't?" I asked quietly. He looked away. "It's complicated, Mom. Vanessa has certain expectations, and our relationship with her family is important. More important than your relationship with your dying father." The bluntness of my question seemed to startle him. "That's not fair." "No, it wasn't fair," I agreed. "None of it was fair. It wasn't fair that your father got cancer. It wasn't fair that I had to care for him alone while you were too busy with your life to visit more than a handful of times. It wasn't fair that when he died, your priority was your wife's birthday dinner." "I'm trying to apologize here," Michael said, defensive again. "Are you? Because it sounds more like you're making excuses." He stood abruptly, pacing the room. "What do you want from me, Mom? I can't change the past." "No, you can't," I agreed. "But you can be honest about it. With me and with yourself." He stopped pacing, his expression troubled. "Look, I know I should have been around more. I feel guilty about it. Okay, Dad and I were close, and I missed so much at the end. But Vanessa, she has strong opinions about how we spend our time. She didn't feel comfortable around sickness, and she really doesn't like being in this house, says it reminds her of death now." The honesty was refreshing, if painful. So you let your wife's discomfort outweigh your father's needs and my needs during the hardest time of our lives. Michael's face flushed. That's not how I see it. How do you see it then? Help me understand. He struggled for words. I love Vanessa. I made vows to her. Sometimes that means making difficult choices. Yes, marriage requires difficult choices. I agreed. But those choices reveal our true priorities. Your father and I had 35 years of making choices that prioritized each other and you. When the time came for you to make a difficult choice, you prioritized your wife's birthday dinner over your father's death. You're never going to let that go, are you? He asked bitterly. It's not about letting go, Michael. It's about recognizing the truth of who you are now, not who I wish you were or who your father believed you could be. He stared at me, something like fear flickering in his eyes. What does that mean? I sighed, suddenly tired of the circular conversation. It means I've accepted reality. Our relationship has changed. You've changed. I need to live my life accordingly. Are you talking about the will? He asked the question, confirming my suspicions about his visit's true purpose. What makes you ask about the will? He had the grace to look embarrassed. Uncle Thomas mentioned something about you meeting with James Atherton. I just wondered if everything was okay financially. My finances are in order, I said neutrally. Is that why you're here today? Concerned about your inheritance? No, God, Mom. How can you think that I came because I miss Dad and I miss how things used to be between us. I softened slightly, recognizing the grain of truth in his words. I miss that too. But we can't go back. We can only move forward honestly. What does that mean for us? He asked, uncertainty clear in his voice. It means I'll always be your mother, and I'll always love you. But I won't pretend anymore. I won't make excuses for your choices or act like they haven't hurt me deeply. Michael looked stricken. Have you changed your will? The directness of the question confirmed everything. Would it matter if I had? Of course it would matter. Dad would want you to leave the house and everything to me, your only son. Your father wanted many things, Michael. He wanted you by his side when he was dying. He wanted you to support me in my grief. He wanted to know you had grown into a man of character and compassion. Michael's face flushed with anger. So that's it. You're punishing me by cutting me out. I'm not punishing you, I said calmly. I'm making choices based on the relationship we actually have, not the one I wish we had. I can't believe this, he muttered. After everything Dad and I shared, you're going to erase me from his legacy. Your father's legacy isn't about money or property, Michael. It's about the values he lived by, the lives he touched, the love he gave freely without keeping score. That legacy lives on in the people who truly appreciated it. He grabbed his keys from the coffee table. I need to go. Vanessa is waiting. Of course she is, I said quietly. He paused at the door, looking back at me with a mixture of anger and hurt. This conversation isn't over. No, I agreed. But it's over for today. After he left, I sat in Frank's chair again, feeling strangely calm despite the confrontation. I had spoken my truth without anger but with clarity. For the first time since Frank's death, I felt fully in control of my life and choices. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived for Michael. James had taken it upon himself to send a formal notification of the will, change something I hadn't requested but didn't regret. Michael needed to understand that actions have consequences, a lesson that should have been learned long ago. I didn't hear from Michael for 3 weeks after that. When he finally called, his voice was subdued. I got a letter from your lawyer, he said without preamble. Yes, James thought it best to inform you officially. So it's true. You've cut me out completely. Not completely, I corrected. You'll receive your father's watch collection, which he always intended for you, and several other personal items that were significant to your relationship. The house and the bulk of the financial assets will go to people and causes that were there for your father when it mattered most. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I really screwed up, didn't I? It was the first genuine acknowledgement he'd made, and it touched a place in my heart I thought had hardened. Yes, you did, but it doesn't have to define our future relationship. What does that mean? It means the will is signed and filed, and I have no intention of changing it again, but how we relate to each other going forward is still unwritten. That depends on choices we both make from this point on. He was quiet again, processing. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything right now, I told him. Just think about what kind of relationship you want us to have separate from any financial considerations. That conversation marked a turning point. It wasn't an immediate reconciliation, but it was the beginning of honesty between us. Over the next few months, Michael began to visit more regularly without Vanessa. We talked about Frank sharing memories both painful and joyful. Sometimes we argued, old hurts surfacing, but we worked through them with a new frankness that would have made Frank proud. On the 1-year anniversary of Frank's death, Michael came alone to the cemetery. We stood together at the graveside, placing fresh flowers on the marker that seemed too small to contain the essence of the man we had both loved. I miss him every day, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. So do I replied, taking his hand. He would have hated us being at odds with each other. I smiled slightly. He would have knocked our heads together and told us to grow up. Michael laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in too long. Yeah, he would have. He paused, then added, I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I know it doesn't change the past, but I am truly sorry. I squeezed his hand. I know, honey. I know. As we walked back to our cars, Michael asked hesitantly, would you consider joining us for dinner next weekend? Vanessa and I are trying to work on some things. It was a small olive branch, but I accepted it gratefully. I'd like that. I drove home alone, feeling Frank's presence more strongly than I had in months. I could almost hear his voice saying, see, Jenny, I told you he'd figure it out eventually. Maybe Frank had been right all along. Maybe sometimes it takes a hard lesson to truly grow. The will would remain unchanged, a testament to the consequences of Michael's choices during the most difficult period of our lives. But perhaps its greatest value wasn't in the redistribution of assets, but in the painful clarity it had forced upon us all. That night, I wrote a letter to Frank, a ritual I'd begun shortly after his death. I told him about the day, about the visit to his grave, about the tentative steps toward reconciliation with Michael. And I thanked him, as I always did, for the love he had given me and the strength I had found in his absence. As I sealed the letter in the box where I kept them all, I felt at peace with my decisions. Changing my will hadn't been about revenge or punishment. It had been about honesty, about aligning my final wishes with the reality of my relationships, not their idealized versions. Frank had taught me many things in our years together, but perhaps the most important was that love doesn't mean blind acceptance. Sometimes love means holding people accountable even when it's painful. Sometimes love means making difficult choices. And sometimes those difficult choices lead to unexpected healing. It's been 2 years since I changed my will after my husband's funeral. Looking back on that difficult time, I realize how far I've come on this journey without Frank. The grief never completely disappears, but it changes, becomes more manageable, like a stone in your pocket that you carry always, but learn to live with. My relationship with Michael has evolved too. Our honest conversation after he received the lawyer's letter broke through years of unspoken resentments and expectations. It wasn't an immediate fix, but it opened a door to something more authentic between us. He visits regularly now, sometimes with Vanessa, sometimes alone. Our conversations are deeper, more meaningful than they had been even before Frank's illness. Vanessa and I have reached a kind of truce. She'll never be the daughter-in-law I hoped for, but she treats me with more respect now, perhaps understanding finally that relationships require effort from both sides. She and Michael have started marriage counseling, which was Michael's idea, surprising us both. He told me he realized after Frank died how fragile relationships can be, how easily they can slip away when neglected. The scholarship in Frank's name has already helped 3 promising students continue their education. Each semester, I receive letters from the recipients telling me about their studies and how the financial support has made a difference. I keep these letters in a special box alongside the ones I write to Frank. Sometimes I imagine him reading them, too proud of the legacy he never knew he would leave. I still live in our home, though. I've made it more my own now. Frank's study has become my art studio, where I've rediscovered the joy of painting that I set aside during our busy years raising Michael and building careers. I've made new friends through my art classes and my support group, people who knew me first as Jenny, not as Frank's wife or Michael's mother. There's freedom in that, in being seen for yourself alone. Last month, Michael and Vanessa announced they're expecting a baby, my first grandchild. The joy I felt at this news surprised me with its intensity. Despite everything, life continues bringing new beginnings even after painful endings. Frank would have been over the moon at becoming a grandfather. In quiet moments, I like to think he knows somehow. My will remains unchanged. The house will still go to Frank's niece Amy, who visits often with her husband and young children, filling these rooms with laughter again. The bulk of our savings will fund the scholarship and support the Cancer Research Center. Michael will receive certain personal items and a modest sum enough to know he wasn't forgotten, but not enough to suggest his earlier actions had no consequences. He hasn't asked me to reconsider, which tells me he's truly changed. The Michael of 3 years ago would have continued to pressure me to make it about the money. This Michael seems to understand it was never really about the inheritance at all, but about respect, about showing up, about valuing family in actions, not just words. Last week, he helped me organize Frank's books, deciding which to keep and which to donate to the university library. We found Frank's journal tucked between volumes of poetry, a journal I didn't know existed. Together we read his thoughts about family, about his hopes for Michael, about his love for me. There were entries from his last month's reflections on mortality and what truly matters at the end of a life well lived. When everything else falls away, Frank had written, all that remains is love. Not the sentimental kind that makes for greeting cards, but the gritty showing up kind. The kind that gets out of bed at 3 a.m. to hold a sick child. The kind that drives across town in a snowstorm because someone needs you. The kind that forgives not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Michael wept when he read those words, and I held him as he hadn't let me hold him since he was a boy. I failed him, he whispered. I wasn't there when he needed me most. We all fail sometimes, I told him. What matters is that we learn that we do better when given another chance. And that's what I've come to understand through this difficult journey. Changing my will wasn't an ending, but a beginning. It forced us to face hard truths, to strip away pretense, to rebuild on a foundation of honesty rather than obligation. In doing so, we found a way back to each other that honors Frank's memory more truly than any inheritance could have done. Frank always said that a legacy isn't what you leave behind, but what you build in others. By that measure, his legacy lives on not just in the scholarship that bears his name, but in the lessons we've all learned about what matters most, about showing up, about the courage to face difficult truths, about forgiveness that acknowledges hurt rather than denying it. I still write to Frank every night telling him about my day, about Michael and the coming grandchild, about the small joys and sorrows that make up a life. Sometimes I think I feel him near me, his hand on my shoulder, his voice in my ear saying, "You're doing just fine, Jenny, just fine." And I am, not despite the difficult choices I've made, but because of them. Because sometimes love means having the courage to change a will, to stand firm in your truth, to demand better from those you love most. And sometimes that difficult choice becomes the gift that allows everyone to grow into their better selves. What do you think about my decision to change my will? Would you have done the same in my position? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about family relationships, difficult choices, and finding strength after loss. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most healing outcomes.